video up on Chapter 18. This is transfer of title and risk in sales contracts. Why do we care about this? Well, there's potential problems in terms of who actually owns the goods may be subject to creditors seizing them, the government potentially seizing them, being subject to bankruptcy claims. All of those things need to have the determination of who actually owns them. And so when title passes is important. I think the chapter is somewhat straightforward. One of the more, I think, interesting parts of the chapter is this concept insurable interest. Usually you can only buy insurance or place insurance on something you own, but that's not entirely true. You can also have insurance on something where you have a title interest coming down the road, meaning you don't own it yet, but because you've already have a contract to sell, later the seller will be transferring title to you. You may now have an economic interest in the continued existence of those goods, where if they got destroyed or lost, you'd be harmed, even though you don't own them at this time. It's a fine line, but generally speaking, once the seller's marked certain goods in their inventory to eventually be shipped to you, or the goods are manufactured to a certain percentile, knowing that those goods are going to be yours, you may have an insurable interest in those goods, even though you don't own them yet. Generally speaking, you can't get insurance on something you don't own because it'll be just purely a gambling contract. I can't take insurance on my neighbor's home because it would actually create what we call a moral hazard. I'd actually hope it burned down because I don't have any interest in the property. I don't really know my neighbors. It sounds terrible, but you get my drift, right? You usually have to have some kind of interest, some kind of economic stake in property in order to have an insurable interest. And so that's why we also want to consider who owns it. Whoever owns it, they definitely have an insurable interest. But someone else may have an insurable interest if they have an economic stake in the further existence of the goods, because they're probably going to get them. And the same with risk of loss. Who bears the risk of loss? The seller, the buyer? And generally speaking, the bottom line test is whoever has dominion and control over the goods is usually the party that bears the loss. That is often also the person with title, but not always, because we know bailment situations come up. In other situations, I might sell something to you, but you say, well, that you paid for it. Say I'm selling my lawnmower. You paid for it. You're saying, great, but I've got my little convertible today. I can't take the lawnmower from you. I'll pick it up tomorrow. Title and risk of loss has actually passed to the buyer at that point because I made it available to them. They just simply don't have the ability to take it with them that day. Now, there's a bailment situation, probably a mutual benefit bailment. I'm not getting any money, but part of the contract was the expectation they could leave it with me for another day. And during that period of time, I owe a reasonable degree of care. But so I do a reasonable degree of care with the lawnmower. I keep it in my shed and keep a lock on it. But somebody breaks in and steals it. Who bears the risk of loss? The seller or the buyer? There, the buyer would, because not only did title pass to them, but the right and the opportunity to exercise dominion control did as well. So classifications, the nature of the goods, terms of the transaction, you can put anything you want in the contract as well. These are principles that if we're not clear about who's going to bear risk of loss and who's going to have the obligation to maintain insurance or the cost of shipping, all of those things can be outlined in your contract, and you can put a lot of shifting burdens back and forth between the parties if you have that negotiation power. And think about it, if you're the buyer, you're going to want everything to stay on the seller's end in terms of liability and risk of loss until the latest moment possible. And that brings up the different kinds of contracts in terms of whether it's a shipping contract or whether it's a destination contract, which we'll get to in a second. Existing goods identified at the time of contracting. Okay, I'm buying this lawnmower. You're identifying it right now, and we contract right now for the purchase. We know title and risk of loss pass at that moment. It's common sense. Sometimes goods aren't yet in existence because I'm just looking at a floor model, and you're going to manufacture the thing. Well, then risk of loss has not passed, even though we have a valid contract, because the goods are not existing. I might have an insurable interest in the goods as they're becoming into being, if they're earmarked to be mine down the road, because I might suffer economic harm if those goods aren't, in fact, delivered and completed. Negotiable instruments, sometimes you don't actually, you know where the goods are, you know where they exist, but they're in a warehouse. And in order to actually purchase them, we don't actually go to the warehouse or go and get them. I negotiate with you in some office, and you actually give me a negotiable instrument called a warehouse receipt. Basically, it's like a title document. At that moment, risk of loss would pass to me, even though it's at some warehouse. Now, there might be somebody else that's going to be on the hook if the warehouse does something negligent because it's a bailment situation. But at that moment of transferring the legal documentation that gives me the right to exercise dominion control over the goods, that's when the risk of loss passes to me as well. It's pretty much, I think, common sense for the most part. Future goods, marking and shipment. We know a future good is something that didn't exist at the time of contracting, but once it comes into existence, it's marked to be mine. Title still hasn't passed. It's just marked to be mine. But once it's marked to be mine, I now have an insurable interest. When does it become mine? Well, now it goes into those two different kinds of contract. If it's a shipment contract, once the seller sends it onto the carrier's truck or dock or things like that, now the buyer bears the risk of loss moving forward from that point, because in a shipment contract, the risk of loss passes at the point of time where the carrier receives the goods. Now, most of us, if you're the buyer, you always want to negotiate for a destination contract. And most of us do. Most contracts are destination contracts. What is that? We have no liability as the buyer of goods until they're delivered to a point of designation, also called a designation contract. The book makes it a little confusing, sound like they're two different contracts. Those are the same. A destination contract is the same as a fee on board. Free on board means exactly the same thing. It's a destination contract. The seller has all the obligations in terms of expense to actually have it brought to me or to my location where I've said, and they bear the risk of loss if something happens in between the time they gave it to the carrier and the time it resides at my home. Now, they may have a claim against the carrier, but that's none of my business. Hey, if I order 3 shirts from Charles Twitt from England, and it's a destination contract, I may have paid the money now, so we have a contract for sale. They may have manufactured shirts. They may already have them in stock. Either way, I'm not going to bear any risk of loss until those goods arrive at my mailbox out here in Brimfield. That's a destination contract or a free on board contract. Same thing as a destination. What makes it very distinct, though, is a free on board means that the seller also pays for the cost of shipping. And it's sort of a fun little topic. I don't know why I think I could sail. I actually had to be rescued once in Barbados. I told the people that were renting sailboats that I knew how to sail, so I rented the sailboat, and I had to get rescued by the Coast Guard from Barbados because I know how to sail one way. I just didn't know how to get back. And so I have this fantasy about being a sailor. And every so often I look at sailboats on eBay or other things and just think someday I'm going to sail around the world. I actually saw a beautiful sailboat that was very, very nicely priced, but it was out in California. So guess what I tried to write into the contract? I tried to write in the contract. So the sale price would be X number of dollars. Say it was $7,000. And I put FOB, Hyannisport, Massachusetts. Not that I have a place in Hyannisport, but that's the only place I can think of. And there's a harbor there, and there's a yacht master, harbor master, and stuff like that, and they could deliver the boat there. You know how much it would cost to bring a boat from California all the way over to the East Coast? It costs a small fortune. And what does free on board mean? It means the seller will have the legal obligation to pay all the costs and fees and arrangements to get the item to wherever the destination is. And they also bear the risk of loss. And this was a boat that, I don't know if you could carry it overland. Not that it was monstrous, but I mean, it'd have to be on one of those wide load trucks, or it would have to be sailed. How are you going to sail it through the Panama Canal and bring it all the way around? You'd have to have a crew and everything else. It costs a fortune. And I'm a pretty ethical guy, and I think I'm a moral guy. So the seller says, what's this free on board thing? This is something to do with boating? They weren't that knowledgeable. I goes, no, it means that you're going to be responsible for the cost and risk during shipment to Hyannisport. And I said, well, that's going to cost 10 times more than the boat. I said, absolutely. And they said, well, we don't want to go forward. And I said, I don't blame you. But free on board is an important tool you as a buyer want to have. And as a seller, you don't want to have. As a seller, you want shipment contracts. You want to say, hey, once I deliver it to UPS or to FedEx or whatever transportation modality we can agree to, I'm done. I'm over. I've delivered it. It was in good condition at the time I delivered it. And that's what we want to do. Sales of fungible goods. It's just nice to know what the term fungible good means. It's not that big a deal. But sometimes when you order 10,000 bushels of wheat, it might be coming out of 100 bushel or 10,000 bushel silo. You own a proportional percentage of this fungible good. Meaning fungible, it's all the same thing. You just own a portion of it. If you invest in oil in the stock market, you don't have like your own container of oil. You have a percentage of a much larger pool or containment of it, and that's all fungible. And it's important if you're into consumer protection. Sometimes when you buy food products, they have to tell you the unit price per ounce or per pound or things like that, so you can do consumer savviness, if you will, in terms of buying, knowing whether or not it was more valuable to buy the larger package or the smaller package, because you get the unit pricing based upon a fungible size of 1 ounce or 1 pound or so much weight or mass, things like that. Damage or destruction of goods. This is a pretty interesting topic. So if the goods are completely destroyed prior to when title passes, we know the buyer doesn't go forward, they're done. But what if it's partially damaged? Now the buyer has an option. The buyer can say, well, I'm out. I didn't want something partially damaged. I wanted something that was 100% appropriate and working and flawless. However, sometimes a product is so important to you that you're willing to still go forward, but now that it's damaged, should you have to pay full price? No. In fact, there's something called reformation. You can actually go forward with the contract, and the contract price will be reduced by the amount of diminished value that the destruction or partial destruction has occurred. It's the option at the buyer, and obviously that's a nice tool for the buyer, because sometimes the buyer says, it's 90% what I need, and I can maybe fix the other 10% of my own. With my own repairs or things like that. So, and again, damage to unidentified goods. If it's an unidentified good, it's not either yet physically in existence or it's not owned by the seller. There, the contract is simply avoided. It's pretty straightforward. Not worried about reservation of title. I am worried about this. Not I should say worried, but this is a very important part of the chapter. This is more interesting. Sale on approval and with right of return. Most of us actually buy most of our goods what we call a right of return. So if I go to I don't know, Walmart today, and I buy this coffee mug, and there's probably a policy at Walmart. I don't know what it is. Is it 90 days, 30 days? Some of you might know off the top of your head. Some have much longer ones, like up to 90 days. Meaning as long as I don't put any really wear and tear on the product, sometimes I bought a shirt one time, and I wasn't very careful about the arm lengths, and I have a very big neck, and so I got the neck length right, but the arm length was literally like, it was almost like half of a short sleeve to like a long sleeve. It looked ridiculous on me. And did I have a right to return it? Somebody can say, well, yeah, you had a right to return it because it was a mutual mistake of fact. No, there wasn't. There was a one-sided mistake of fact. They weren't mistaken at all. It was clearly labeled, and I was just careless when I purchased it. So I wouldn't have a right to return it under mutual mistake of fact, but I might have a right to return it because it was a sale and return. Many organizations take a great deal of pride in their goodwill, and they think it helps in their consumer marketing to say, hey, you have a right to return this as long as it's not used and abused within a certain time frame. Some things you can't return. I don't know what they are, but sometimes the legislation no sale, all sales final. Now that's distinct from a warranty flaw, which we'll get into chapter 19, very important chapter. But right now, sell and return is basically no questions asked. You return the goods because you just had a change of heart, change your mind. It doesn't fit, whatever, and like the feel of it. Or I found out I got the same thing from, my wife on my birthday, and I bought the same shirt. Why would I want two? Or why would I want an additional one if it's just wasteful? That's a right of return. Now, here's what's interesting. Because it's a sale, title passed to me. Because title passed to me, I have the right to exercise dominion and control. Therefore, if anything happens to the goods while I'm in possession of them, I'm the owner of them. So if they get stolen, if they get damaged, if I spill a cup of coffee, and if my dog jumps all over my shirt and ruins it, I bear the risk of loss because it was a sale, it was completed. So now I may have voided the ability and right to return the goods. That makes sense, right? So it's a sale and return. The sale's completed, I own it, but I might have a right to return it if it's still in its pristine packaging and conditions and things like that. Now, manufacturers have gotten a little bit more savvy about this, and they often charge something called a restocking or reshelving fee, because if you open up a shirt out of the packaging, it's kind of difficult for them to repackage it appropriately, and they may have to send it off to be laundered and pressed and things like that to be repackaged. And it does make sense for them to charge that. I think it does, to charge their fee. So again, a sale and return, the sale is completed, but the buyer may have a right to undo the contract. But why is it important to understand? What's the underlying legal principle here? The buyer owns it. They've got it. And if it gets stolen, it gets damaged, they bear the risk. And if they go through bankruptcy or creditors are seizing their goods through a court order, they own it. They can't say, I have a right to return that to, Van Heusen or the Brooks Brothers. No, you don't. Because it's been voided. Now, that's very different than sale and approval. If you ever heard advertising that says, try it for 90 days. If you're not completely satisfied, simply return it with postage and handling. There, that means the sale isn't completed. it's sort of a tentative sale. It's really a contract to sell. So you have the right during the 90 days to use it, to enjoy it, and they bear the risk of loss if something unusual happens. Obviously, you're in a bailment situation, so you have to exercise reasonable care. But say I'm exercising reasonable care with the mattress, and a pipe breaks in my home, an unexpected thing, freak things happen, and water damages the new mattress that I bought on sale on approval. I haven't approved it yet. I have this 90-day period to, sort of feel it out, for lack of a better way of saying it. The pipe leaks all over the mattress. Can I return it? Yeah. They bear the risk of it. They're still the title owner, and I didn't cause it, and I wasn't negligent during that period of time. This is a very important concept, and it's very risky for sellers, but sellers usually do it when they have a great deal of confidence in their product, that they know most buyers are probably going to be satisfied. And I'm not a business guy, but many of you are business majors. I imagine there's all kinds of analytics, and people study numbers, and they know that only a certain percentage of their product would likely be returned. And it's a big selling point to say, hey, if you're not completely satisfied after 90 days or after 10 days or whatever, you can return it for a small package and handling fee, or maybe nothing. We'll even pay the package and handling. And they really are trying to sell to the consumer that they have such a great product that they know the likelihood is they're going to be proven. Now, what if it gets stolen? The mattress is a good example, but say I think I joined one time. My father killed me because I didn't have any money, so I ended up going on his credit card. But I bought like a classic books of the month club or some nonsense like this because I wanted to be smarter than I thought I was or something. So I was ordering all these classic books, and I got like one a month. And the first one was, I don't know, some kind of Charles Dickens book or something like that, which I think I actually read. I do enjoy some Charles Dickens readings. But anyway, I got the book, and it said, if you're not completely satisfied, you completely just return it. And I didn't. I ended up keeping them, but it was on a sale or return type thing. Now, what about this? And this is what I did do because I was pretty young at the time I did it. I get the right to do a 90-day return. So I can use it, I can review it, and if I'm not happy within the 90 days, I can return and get my money back, as long as I paid on that one the shipping and handling. But what if I did, which I did with a lot of my things, I write on the inside cover, bought this day, July 20th, 1982, Jim Corman's classic literature book, and I wrote in it. By doing something like that, I've done an act inconsistent with my approval. I've implicitly given up my right to return the goods. I have approved it by taking an action that diminishes the value of the product. So if you bought like a car, for example, Chrysler did this for a little while. Maybe some of you remember we had a huge crisis in America when President Obama was in office over the American car industry was collapsing, and we as citizens, taxpayers, pumped a ton of money into it. We got it all back, which is very fortunate. But to lift up the American car industry, all these loans were given by the government, which is us. And I can remember Chrysler had a thing out for a while. I think it was a long period of time. I don't know if it was 120 days or 6 months. You could use the vehicle and you could put on so many miles, and if you just didn't like it at the end of the period of time, you could return and get all your money back. That was a very, very confident sale and approval. So you use it, and now what if you bought it but you'd had it painted and you had I had my law office name, Attorney James Corman with scales of justice on the side, maybe a shark or something to show him really tough in court or something. Obviously I've done something inconsistent with my approval. I've approved it. I can't now return the item and suggest somehow that I didn't prove it by taking an action to identify the goods as going to be mine. You can't do that. So it would be approved by the very nature of it, an act inconsistent with keeping and preserving the goods in their preserved state. So those are the two different kinds. One, sale and return is completed, it's done at yours, but you might have a window of opportunity to undo it. The other is it's not completed yet until you approve, whether it's 30 days, 90 days, whatever they give you in the contract. But you can't do an act inconsistent with that right, or it will be deemed basically ratified, and you've basically waived your right to disapprove, and you've approved it by the act of making it unique to yourself by having your name embroidered on the side, or having the goods painted, or like me, writing on the inside of those books. Father's great joy. Different kinds of sales where title can actually be passed where we didn't think it would be normally. So one is a sale by and trustee, and this is the one I have on your test. There's no question about it. I haven't posted that test yet. But a sale by and trustee, who's in a trustee? That's someone who's a merchant. What's a merchant? Someone who deals regularly in the course of business, selling and buying goods of that kind. So if I take my watch here, my Seiko watch, and I say my bezel was scratched, or this one doesn't run on a battery, but say it did. It ran on a battery and the bezel was scratched. If I went to a jeweler that sells new and used watches of this kind or like them, and I dropped it off there and I said, hey, Fred, I need a new bezel on the watch, and could you put a new battery in the back, maybe a new watch band? Yeah, sure, I'll dress it all. And for whatever reason, whether it's intentional fraud or whether it's accidental, some store clerk sees it and assumes this must be going into the used watch bin that they sell new and used watches there. And they put a tag on it, they price it out, and you're an innocent purchaser, you come in, and this cost me originally about $200, and now you see it in the sales case, it's used, but it's in good shape, and you see it in there for $40. I'm going, I got a nice Seiko watch for $40 used, I'll buy it. Did title pass to you? Yes, and we knew from previous chapter, generally thieves cannot pass good title to a third person, even a good faith good purchaser. This is one of the exceptions, sale by a trustee, because we expect consumers when they go into a shop that sells new and used items that the seller does have the power to convey title. Now, what about my rights? So now I find out my Seiko watch, a little story behind the Seiko watch, nothing really all that fancy about it, but I bought it on the day my father died. I don't know why, just a goofy mood, and father died, and let me order a watch that I always wanted, so I bought this watch. So I have a little sentimental value to it. So it's worth, I don't know, like I said, it's $179, close to $200. It's used though, it's beat up, so it's worth, I don't know, $50. And so now I want my watch back. I go back to the store and I say, hey, Fred, where's my watch? He goes, geez, Jim, we accidentally sold it to Sue. If I can find Sue, here's the test question. I'm going to give it away. Hopefully you're watching the videos. If I can find Sue, do I get the watch back? No. Unless Sue wanted to be nice about it and give it back. But could Sue basically say, no, I have good title? She'd be right. My only recourse is to sue the store for the monetary value of this watch. The monetary value is not that high. That's all I can do. You can't sue for sentimental value. So that's an important concept. So sale by a trustee is when someone is a merchant, sells goods of that nature, new and used. They have the power to convey title, even though it wasn't authorized. Surprise a lot of people, but we want to protect the consumer more than we want to protect the victim. There, you can go after them criminally if it was a criminal intent. Sometimes it's accidental, though. Doesn't matter to you as the victim either way so much. You just want your watch back, but you only get money if it's a sale by a trustee. Consignment sales, that's like an antique shop. You go in there's often many different booths. The person running that antique shop probably doesn't own 90% of the goods and products in that store. Who does? Somebody else who's consigned them. They've given title authority to the owner of the shop or some other agent to convey title to buyers. So if I own one of these shops, kind of one of my, I have a million different fantasies about things I want to do in my life. One of them is to own an antique shop like that, where I have maybe a few things of my own, but I rent out booths, if you will, or sections of the store to other sellers. They give me not title, they give me simply power to transfer title. That's a consignment sale. I know people sometimes have tag sales in my neighborhood. When I was a kid, I never want to do one, so I just bring over some of my stuff to the neighbor and I say, hey, if you sell this stuff, I'll give you 10%. That's a consignment sale. Another one's estoppel. I know I brought it up in a previous chapter, but sometimes we make it look like somebody else is the owner of certain goods. And if we make them look like they're the owner of goods, they have the power to transfer title, and we're stopped from denying they have the power to do that. A friend of mine, for example, who always has financial trouble between him and several of his ex-wives and things, and so he's constantly buying motorcycles and things, but he puts it in his mother's name. He uses them all the time. Now, what's he really doing? He puts title in his mother's name as a fiction. But would the mother have the power to go and sell those goods to a third party who didn't know the truth behind who really owns the vehicle? Yeah, because he'd be stopped from denying it because the title instruments, the documents suggest that he was the owner. Sometimes people do that when they store some of their stuff over somebody else's house for whatever reason, good, bad, or immoral, or just because of space. It might make that person look like they have the power to exercise dominion control and maybe sell those goods. Again, documents of title, that relates to the estoppel example I just gave. If you have the document of title says you own the car, you own the car. That's all the law is going to treat it as. Don't worry about so much when documents need to be filed or recorded. That goes to the UCC. But generally speaking, if the documents aren't filed at a certain place where it was supposed to be to prove your ownership, you may lose title to somebody else who has a superior appearance of title. Avoidable title, I'm not going to worry about that too much. Consignment sale, title, estoppel, And that's pretty much it for the chapter. Went a little longer than I thought. Kind of an important chapter. But the next chapter, I believe I test just on it by itself because it's really that important. We often think we have this power to return goods simply because we're unhappy with them. It's not necessarily true. Most larger sellers of goods do have that sale and return policy, but they don't have to. They can say all sales final. But imagine if you went into a shop and you bought a very expensive lathe or snow blower or snowmobile, a boat, who knows what. You buy all these different things for big money and they break down. They don't work. You should be able to return them, right? Well, if they have a sale and return policy, no problem, right? Because it's within that time frame. But what if they said all sales final? Might you still have a power to return if they're defective? What does it mean by defective? They breached some kind of warranty. That's what Chapter 19 is about. Sorry to allude to it here, but I'm excited about it because it's really an important concept in business law that I want to drive home. And I think I test you on it separately, and most people do pretty well on the test. So those of you that aren't doing great on quizzes, it's a good chance to build up your exam scores on that one.